Hello, this is Saucy Jack. This is something I've always wanted to try to do, but I've never quite gotten around to doing it. So this will be my first creepypasta narration. Like I said, this is my first time, and any constructive criticism would be more than welcome. I'm just testing this out to see how this works out. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Tonight's story is called The Krusher Kompanski Incident by JRubas. I read somewhere last night Krusher Kompanski is going to be inducted into the World Wrestling Entertainment Hall of Fame next September. The headline said something like controversial pro wrestler nominated. The article went on to talk about his life and the quote, suspicious circumstances surrounding his death. Suspicious my ass. There's no ambiguity to it. I shot the fat motherfucker in his head, and everybody who gives a damn knows it. It was front page news when it happened. It was 1985 after all, right in the middle of the 1980s wrestling boom. So of course, a wrestler getting blown away by a booker backstage was big news. What happened beforehand was big news too. Let me back it up. In 1973, I was 20, a tall, lanky kid with evil eyes and genius-level street smarts. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 to work for my uncle, Anthony Donaco. If that name sounds familiar to you, it should. He was a captain in the Los Angeles crime family. They called him Tony Knox. In September '73, Tony bought out a wrestling promotion based in Barstow called the Mojave Wrestling Federation, NWF. It was a popular act, had 30 guys and its own arena. Hell, it even had a lucrative Saturday morning time slot on TV. The owner, a fat little guy named Bill Watkins, was a gambler though, and most of the money his company made went on the table, if you know what I mean. Every couple weeks, he'd drive out to LA and place bets with Uncle Tony. More often than not, he lost. Uncle Tony was a patient guy, and whenever Watkins couldn't pay, Tony'd give him a pass. Finally, he called in his debt. Man, it was a debt. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was a lot. Watkins said he'd have to close shop and file for bankruptcy, and he still wouldn't have enough. So Tony cut him a deal. Hand over the NWF and he'd call it even. Watkins obliged. If I like bad mob puns, I'd say it was an offer he couldn't refuse. Anyway, after they signed the paperwork, but before Uncle Tony went to Barstow, he gave me a call and we met at the back of his lounge in Newport Beach. He was a tall guy, lean and mean, graying hair and hard blue eyes. You're into that wrestling crap, ain't you? He asked. I shrugged. I guess, though I didn't let on I was a huge fan, or rather, had been growing up. My favorite was always Gorgeous George, wore silky capes and had his valet spray perfume in the ring. Back in Jersey, we had Garden State Wrestling in Trenton, which aired on Saturday nights. Sometimes, when the wind was right, we got wrestling from Albany. Tony nodded. All right, tell me about it. What do you want to know? Tony shrugged. Tell me everything. Lucky for his ass, I was the kind of fan who liked to know the history of shit. So I read a lot of books. Pro wrestling in the U.S. started at carnivals, and even today, wrestling insiders still use a lot of carny lingo. Wrestling broke away in the 20s or thereabouts, and every region had its own thing. I don't know if they do it anymore, but back then, it all operated on a territory system. You had the National Wrestling Association, NWA, as a governing body. Then, in the 60s, the American Wrestling Alliance came along. Under them, you had dozens and dozens of different promotions or companies. Think WWE or TNA today. Promoter bosses often worked small patches in the country. There's Jim Crockett in Virginia and the Carolinas, Georgia Championship Wrestling in Georgia, Southwest Wrestling All-Stars in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. If a promoter tried to promote himself on someone else's territory, there'd be hell to pay. You know, it's funny, but the NWA might as well have been another mob family. They did sneaky, underhanded shit, you know. This guy from Tennessee messing around in Ohio, sent somebody to rough him up. Things like that. Anyway, the MWF was strictly a California thing. Like I said earlier, it was based in Barstow, but it traveled through the desert on occasion, putting on outdoor shows in the summer. Every once in a while, we made it as far out west as San Diego, but that's pretty much it. You know a lot, Tony said. I shrugged. I read books. Tony laughed. Be here tomorrow. We're going to Barstow. The next day, I met Tony at his place around 8, and we set off east on I-85. surrounded by hard gravel flats tapering off to low, rugged mountains. Barstow is a lot like Vegas, rising up from the desert suddenly and inexplicably. It's smaller than Vegas, but just as jarring if you're not expecting it. That day the sky was a dusty blue, and ragged clouds flew lazily across, north to south. The MWF building was on Parker Street, in the shadow of an overpass. It was a factory of some type at one time. It had 2 stories, had big metal roll-top doors, and big windows at the front. Inside, a long hall led out to the factory floor, which had been converted into a wrestling arena. A ring sat in the middle of the room, with metal gates blocking off the crowd seating just being a bunch of metal folding chairs. An entrance ramp led to the backstage area, locker rooms, toilets, some more offices. "You must be Mr. Donako," someone said behind us. We turned. The guy was short, scrawny, and balding, big black glasses. "I'm Harold, Mr. Watkins Booker." Harold was the guy that ran the day-to-day operation of the company while Bill pissed away his money at craps and blackjacks. He'd been active in the wrestling scene since the 40s. He knew the business like the back of his hand, which pleased Tony. He had someone to take care of the heavy lifting. We all went over to this diner across the highway and talked turkey for a while. Tony figured that after expenses, paying the wrestlers and shit, he could make about 3 G's off the NWF. Half of that had to go to the big boss. It wasn't great, but it was money. And what's the mob all about? Better yet, it was clean money. That was a Tuesday. The Saturday show was going to be taped on Thursday. Me and Tony left Harold in charge of everything and went back to LA. Thursday morning, Tony picked me up and we went back to Barstow. We met the wrestlers, all 30 of them, and watched from the sidelines as people started packing in. Attendance that night was 200. Not great, but whatever. I'm not going to go into details, but the night went good. Crowd loved it. Guys were good. Main event, pitting our biggest face, good guy against our biggest heel, bad guy, was a real treat. A lot of blood. When the heel won and proceeded to work the crowd, shit went wild. People were throwing soda cans, popcorn, boxes, and everything. "Who writes this shit?" I asked Harold. "I do," he said. "For the most part, if a wrestler's big enough, it gets creative control. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it isn't." Boy, was he right. Like I said earlier, that was in September of '73. In November, I got busted roughing a union worker and got 3 years. In that 2 months, I was at Barstow every week, sort of, rediscovering my love of wrestling. Uncle Tony stopped going after the second week and used me as his eyes and ears. I passed messages on to Harold and he got them done. It was a fucking dream, It was lucky. We inherited this great promotion and a great right-hand man. Shit rarely happens that easily. Anyway, back to prison. I did my 3 years, didn't talk, didn't bother anyone. Got out a little early, in July instead of October. First place I went to was Uncle Tony's. "I don't want you out there anymore," he said, hugging me. "I want you doing something else." That something else wound up being the MWF full time. He wanted me to be the jack of all trades type. He wanted me to head up security, book talent, come up with angles, storylines, whatever needed doing. I wouldn't be making big money, but I was okay with that. Uncle Tony bought me a car, got me an apartment in Barstow, and that was that. I was pretty much on my own. For the first year or so, I stuck close to Harold, learning everything I could from the guy. How to do this, how to do that. We came up with a couple angles that went big. Even got us in Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the biggest wrestling mag in the country. We did a brisk business. Not too much more than when we started, yeah, but we were getting by fine. Uncle Tony came by every once in a while to make sure things were going good, and they were. In June of '77, the NWA champ, who had toured all the different promotions, giving the local heroes a shot at the gold, dropped belt to our main guy, punishing Paul Perry. Suddenly, the wrestling community knew who we were, and people who didn't usually give a shit about it started coming by because, hey, they won the belt. We got a second time slot in '79. Friday Night Wrestling was carried all over the Mojave and into San Fran. That summer, we toured a little. After getting permission from the NWA and the regional promoters, we did a show in LA in June and another in Vegas in August. The first brought 10,000 fans, the second 11. We were making more money than ever, and Tony started taking more of an active interest. By the end of '79, he was devoting more time to the NWF than the LA family. And then Vince McMahon took the WWF National. Remember when I said earlier that wrestling worked on a territorial system? Well, there's a reason I said back then. In 1980, Vince McMahon, promoter in the Northeast, started buying out other promotions and their assets, including TV time. He envisioned a huge money-making corporation spanning the country. Hell, I can't say I blame the guy. It was ambitious, but that's not how wrestling worked. He pissed a lot of people off with that. Uncle Tony was one of them. In March, McMahon made a lowball offer to buy the MWF and turn it into a real promotion. Tony told him to go to hell and hung up. He was so offended that he said we should start buying other wrestling promotions and go nationwide too. Sort of a war. Anyone who knows anything about wrestling knows what happened to WCW when they went up against the WWF. They made good ratings, but after a while they lost steam, and one day, old Vinnie Mac came calling with a briefcase full of cash. I was up for the idea. Let's do it, I said. Tony kind of backed down once he did the math. He did buy a couple of TV time slots from failing promotions out east. He also gave me permission to start luring McMahon's talent away. Money's no problem on that front, he said, because fuck that guy. I offered top dollar to the WWF guys, and most of them took it. Some of these meatheads were nationally famous by then, and people wanted to see them. We bought a few time slots from other companies across the country, taking off the NWA in the process. In 1981, they excluded us from hosting the NWA champion, so we scratched championship belts all like shit, and we sent them back to the NWA headquarters and replaced them with our own belts. In retaliation, the NWA kicked us out. Now, I know I've been rambling, but here's the good part. In 1983, the WWF event in Fresno, I got backstage and managed to talk to a few of the guys. None of them seemed interested in my offer except for a big, towering hunk of meat named Krusher Kompanski, real name Hiram Kompanski. He debuted with the WWF in '81 after wrestling under variety names in the South and the Midwest. On TV, he was a giant, but in person, he was even bigger. He was 6'5", 300 pounds, all muscles, and had arms like fucking tree trunks. Standing next to him, I felt like a kid. He wore this black leotard and leather mask. When he cuts promos, he didn't talk. He just grunted and made crushing gestures with his hands. Crush! Crush! He'd yell. Of course, that was all an act. He wasn't the smartest guy, but he was a lot smarter than some of the goons Tony had working for him. He said he wasn't happy in the WWF because he couldn't develop his own character. They told him to be the big, dumb, wild man or get the fuck out. Because he was more popular, his contract, serendipitously, was about to expire. I told him I'd give him more money than Vince McMahon to let him develop his own character. We shook. Krusher Kompanski debuted in the MWF on October 3rd, 1983, running up to the ring to save our biggest heel, Slim Jim Robinson, from a beatdown from the good guys. I was at the announce table that night because I wanted to see him in action, and I'm glad I was. Kompanski was a beast. Despite his massive size, he ran quickly and silently to the ring, slid under the bottom rope, and started kicking ass. Fans recognized him right away and started cheering their asses off. Backstage, I shook his hand and said, "You're fucking great, man. Oh man, that was good." He smiled. "Thanks. I think so too." By December, Krusher Kompanski was our main guy. In the MWF, he wasn't a big, dumb, wild man. He was a psychotic juggernaut who just liked hurting people. Our time slots in the country blew up and everyone wanted to see what the wild man would do next. Would he hit a ref? Maybe. Would he snatch up the announcer up and clobber him over the head? Who knows? By the beginning of '84, me and Uncle Tony were beginning to think we'd have enough capital to go up against the WWF by '85, maybe by '86 at the latest. Two things stopped us. One, Carmen Guggio, boss of the family, started demanding bigger cuts from our profits. "You guys are on TV every week," he said. "I go to look for the news, I come across you guys playing tiddlywinks on Channel 3. You're making more money, so you give me more money. It's only fair." 2. Krusher Kompanski himself. We were building our brand around the guy and he knew it. Sneaky son of a bitch was our star and he started milking it. He wanted more money. He wanted more control. He wanted to choose his matches. He was a fucking prima donna. Poor old Harold, 62 and sickly, nearly lost his mind dealing with that asshole. He'd whine like a little bitch. I don't like that. Or, I don't want to lose to him. Finally, Harold retired. He was dead within a year anyway, but I think he would have stayed to the bitter end if it wasn't for that fat piece of shit. Tony didn't like Kompanski, but he knew on which side his bread was buttered, so he gave in when he could. From October 83 to March of 85, Kompanski didn't lose a single match. Looking back in hindsight, I guess it was a good angle. You know, crazy man just knocking out the competition. The WCW did it with Goldberg in the late 90s. It wasn't supposed to be like that, though. We were going to have him get beat in the mid-84 by the main face, Bob Davis. Kompanski wouldn't happen. Things came to a head in April. Kompanski had already lost to Davis the month before, and he was scheduled for another loss. He bitched and moaned in my ear for 3 weeks. Then all the other nightmares were bitching at me because he was so hard to work with. It was a fucking nightmare. Anyway, on April 10th, Krusher Kompanski went up against Gene Terry, a short, skinny little kid. We were working as the underdog. Kompanski was going to be his first win. Problem, when the match started, Kompanski wouldn't sell anything the kid did. That means when Terry threw a punch, not connecting because wrestling's fake, remember? Kompanski just stood there looking at him. The kid was supposed to get Kompanski up on his shoulders and bring him down to the ring, collapsing it in the process. But when he tried, Kompanski just shoved him aside like he was a flea. It's not in the script, I said. Me and Uncle Tony were in the back watching a TV monitor. Finally, Kompanski snatched the kid up by his throat and gave him a real slam on the mat. You could see the kid on the kid's face. It hurt. Kompanski put his boot in the kid's chest, and the ref had no choice but to count 1, 2, 3. That Pollock motherfucker! I tore up the headset, stood up. Tony put a hand on my arm. Cool it, will you? He just fucked up the match on purpose. Tony nodded. That's okay. He'll get his. I knew instantly what he was talking about. Remember how I said the NWA was like a mob? Well, one of the common practices throughout the wrestling world is to have veteran guys sort of police the locker rooms. If anyone did anything wrong, like purposely flub a match because they were a big whiny bitch, the vets would take care of it in the ring. They'd really hurt the other guy. As in, this shit isn't fake. This guy really just got his nose broken, really. Krusher Kompanski was going to get his on April 15th. Me and Tony had fun planning it out. We'd have Kompanski go up against Bob Davis. Bob would kick Kompanski in the nuts, then whip out a blackjack and work his head over. The ref would ring for a disqualification, but who cared? After security came to fetch it, Kompanski's fat ass, they'd take him out in the parking lot and beat even more shit out of him. It was a fitting punishment. There were at least going to be 300 people in the arena and 100 more watching at home. Humble as ass, you know. The Davis-Kompanski match was the main event of the evening. I was worried about Kompanski getting the upper hand, so I had security and all the other wrestlers on alert, just in case something went wrong they'd all go out to the ring. Anyway, it was late when the match started, maybe 9. The match ran over because the guy who was supposed to win broke his ankle jumping off the turnbuckle, and he and his opponents had to come up with another unscripted ending on the fly. That was teamwork, something Kompanski and his tiny dick wouldn't know anything about. So the guy stuck to the script for the first 5 minutes. Then, when he had Kompanski in the corner, he let fly and got the sorry dick breath right in the sack. Believe it or not, Kompanski didn't cry out. He didn't double over, and he didn't fall down. He just stood up taller as if to say, oh, so it's like that. Sure enough, he grabbed Bob Davis by the throat and started squeezing. The ref in the loop tried to break it up. Kompanski rudely shoved him away. The ref signaled, and the bell rang. Disqualified. Not that it mattered. Bob Davis was turning blue. Then, with a taunting flourish, Kompanski drove his fist into Davis's stomach once, twice, 3 times. God damn it, growled. Tony didn't say anything. Kompanski lifted Bob over his head I threw him out of the ring. He came down on the announcer's tables, which had break because it hadn't been cut beforehand and slid off. I ripped the microphone and headphones off and stormed out of the control booth. The locker rooms were just down the hall. The guys were just sitting around, talking, smoking, and laughing. When they saw me, red-faced and hissing, they perked up. Ring, now! They all nodded and said, yes, boss. Whatever. Started toward the ring. Back in the control booth, I sat down, snatched at my headphone, and put them back on. On screen, Kompanski was ripping the ring apart. Top rope hung limply from the turnbuckle, which is slanted like an ancient tombstone in an even more ancient cemetery. What the fuck is he doing? He's going fucking nuts! First wrestlers hit the ring, sliding under the bottom rope. Kompanski's back was turned. The first hit him hard, but the dickless wonders turned around and caught him by the neck. Every 2 seconds, someone else hit the ring. There were like 20 guys. It was crazy. Even crazier, Kompanski was winning. Punch, punch, headlock. Bodies were dropping and flying over the top rope left and right. One of my guys had a steel pipe, a real steel pipe, not that foam crap, and he hit Kompanski square in the face with it. The fucker didn't even notice. He just grabbed the guy and flung him into the turnbuckle, knocking someone else down in the process. Another guy hit Kompanski with brass knuckles, but he wound up with a broken back from hitting the gate separating the ring from the fans dead on. So a lot of good that did him. By now, blood was pouring off Kompanski in rivulets. He chokeslammed one guy, elbowed another guy behind him in the face. He snatched a baseball bat from another and hit him so hard that it ended his career right there. Security! I yelled. Tony was transfixed. Before you could say kill that son of a bitch, the ring was flooded with guys in yellow shirts. They had batons and tasers. Once they hit the ring, Kompanski was ready. He snatched the first one up, twisted his arm behind his back until he screamed, and then threw him into the rest. Before long, they swarmed him like ants swarm a dead body, but he threw them off like nothing. I know, like hell, I saw him get tased at least a dozen times, but it didn't faze him. I couldn't believe it. Of course, the fans were going crazy. It was the best damn thing they had ever seen. On screen, Kompanski went up, ripped one of the turnbuckle pikes, and swung it at the security guards, hitting him in the head and nearly killing him. They came forward again, but with one swing, Kompanski took them all out. I swear to God he must have took on 50 guys that night, but that wasn't the end. He climbed over the top rope and started back into the entrance ramp. With a dropping heart, I knew where he was going. Crazy son of a bitch, Tony muttered. What is he doing now? He's coming for us, I said, standing up. Tony opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, a loud crash filled the hall. Jimmy! Tony! Kompanski screamed. Tony's eyes went wide and he struggled to his feet. Lock the door, he said. I sprang forward and turned the thumb lock. The door was a piece of shit. It wouldn't hold up long against Krusher Kompanski. You made a big mistake tonight! Kompanski screamed. More crashing. He was tearing down the house as he came. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the big Colt Python I kept in a shoulder rig. Tony's eyes widened. What are you doing? I'm gonna kill this motherfucker, I said. To my ears, I sounded more scared than afraid. Tony shook his head. Kompanski was at the door. One punch and the thing flew off its hinges, skittering halfway across the room before crashing into the floor. I turned, startled, and the monster himself filled the threshold. Big, huffing, covered in blood. He looked like a bull that ate people and spit out their skeletons. Come here, Jimmy. I raised the gun. You asked for it! He started toward me, and I fired. The sound of the blast sounded like cannon fire in a confined space. Kompanski jerked, but he didn't stop. Hell, he didn't even slow. I'm gonna kill you! He screamed. Tony was behind me now, cowering. I fired again and again. Both bullets hit Kompanski in the chest. He jerked. I fired at his stomach. That one slowed him down. Blood was gushing now. He pushed himself on, like a man trudging through 3 feet of snow. I aimed directly at Kompanski's head and fired. Like a massive Cali redwood, Kompanski swayed, toppled, and crashed to the floor. He was dead. With all the controversy surrounding the death of Krusher Kompanski, Tony decided to sell the MWF, but not to Vince McMahon. Owing to the destruction and the 35 plus assaults, some of them were technically classified as attempted murder, the shooting was declared to have been done in self-defense, and I was cleared of any wrongdoing. A famous doctor in LA claimed that Kompanski most likely lapsed in sort of rage to a blackout, rendering him unable to control himself, and granting him superhuman strength. I don't know if that's what happened, and I really don't care. That motherfucker deserved it either way. Hall of Fame my ass. Alright, Saucy Jack one more time before you go. I just want to say thank you if you stuck around this long enough. If you could, maybe leave a like and comment. Possibly consider subscribing if you feel like it. But this was kind of fun. I enjoyed doing it. I might do some more of it. This is Saucy Jack, signing off.